Let's talk about the future of democracy. So, in a world in which um, things are moving this fast and humans are moving very slow, uh, you know, how long before our democratic experiment here gets revamped for a world of AI, sensors, networks?
All right, let me just give you the high level. About 10 years ago, we were looking at this problem. You know, my hobby in metaphysics and philosophy and so on. A fellow called Malcolm Pollock and I came up with an analogy which we called ice, water, steam. Okay. So
Okay.
imagine you have ice where the molecules are kind of very cold. They don't move very far or very fast. They hold their shape, right? Very low energy in the system. Then you add heat or energy in the system, then you get to liquid. Now it can expand to the boundaries of the container. It's more active, more agitation of molecules, et cetera, but still reasonably slow. You add more energy and you get steam, which burns you, is hard to contain. The molecules are highly active, right? We went through a whole kind of series of looking at human endeavor in different ways. Take messaging. We used to send smoke signals or the Pony Express or homing pigeons. Very local, very slow. It was the ice state. Nothing moved very far, or very fast. Then you went to postal mail, which was the liquid state. You could send messages around the world. It just took a long time, and it went to the boundaries of the container. Then we digitized everything, and now we have tweets. And we've totally vaporized our messaging structures, right? Take money. We used to trade camels and goats. There were seashells. Again, very local, very slow. Then we came up with currencies and letters of credit. And then we floated our currencies, even more perfect for the analogy. And then we went to Bitcoin and digital currencies and crypto, and now we vaporized and digitized thing. Same thing with human organization. We used to have clans or tribes that didn't move very far, very fast. Then we moved to say nation states and multinational corporations, and now we have Facebook groups and online TikTok communities, right? And we vaporize that. And the challenge is and this came up when looking at the Arab Spring or the Occupy Wall Street movement, lots of hot air, but nothing stable formed out of it. And the challenge is in a vapor state, stable structures don't form. And so as we vaporize and add more and more technology to different domains like money and democracy, etc., how do we get stable structures? And in the lack of that stable structure, we go back to the old way, which is kind of what's happening in various parts of the world. So that's kind of like just a broad metaphor for what's happening in the world. And I think an intellectual challenge is to think about what's the equivalent of a fridge, right? That can cool things down. Um, and so we actually use the ideal gas law as a metaphor for this, but we don't need to get into that right now. If I apply that pattern to democracy, we've been running democracies at a nation state level for the last few hundred years. And the problem is nation states, in my opinion, are the wrong container. They're too big. For example, nation states can't solve climate change.
I agree with you. The
Right?
fact that our entire democratic process came down to like 4 states,
Ridiculous.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Or you take India, where I'm from. It's 20 different languages and cultures trying to be one country. It makes no sense, right? So what you need to do is granularize. And Paul Safar, I remember getting on stage at Singularity University and said the future of the world is not nation states, it's city states.
Yeah,
And actually, you look at Trump or Brexit, it's not left versus right, it's urban versus rural. You can see that in the map from last
in
night
the data.
very clearly, right? Brexit was 100% London versus the rest of the country. That's the tension that's playing out in the world. If you have, for example, now in the future, let's say 10 years into the future, a city that has vertical farming, satellite internet, solar energy, and small nuclear, water extraction using the Water Abundance Prize winner, you don't need a country. You don't need the infrastructure for a country. And so, therefore, I think we're going to devolve to small communities self determining their future and working out their own structures and then operating in a networked environment in a much more powerful way. And so, that's how I think and in a world of abundance, see, nation states are really great for scarcity, they're terrible for abundance. So, there's a whole bunch of things, different dimensions of looking at
So
this.
so here's the question, right?
Yeah,
I think, the old saying that governments, suck, except, we've got the best version of what's available today. And
democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else.
yes, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. The question becomes, there are better versions. There are better versions that are easy to describe, right? We have a representative government today versus we don't have a direct democracy.
Yes.
That whole situation
But
is
importantly, can I just pause you just for a second? The reason we have a representative government today,
because it started 250 years ago.
well, at the time, information was scarce,
Yes,
right? If
exactly,
you were in
and
DC, you
moved
had
very slowly, and moved
that's
very
right.
slowly.
So if you were in DC, you literally had no idea what was happening in California because the speed of a horse was as fast as you could find out.
But
So we had a
here's the question.
representative. Hey, let me just finish my point. You had a representative come across the country and say, "Here's what my people are thinking. This is why we have a representative." But in a world of this digital, where we have an abundance of information, a representative government doesn't apply, and so we have to really fundamentally rethink our structures from the bottom up.
So the question becomes, is there any way to do this other than a revolution? Other than a starting from a clean sheet of paper? I mean, the reality is governments and
There's a
major
few different
companies,
ways.
let me finish, my turn, don't like giving up power.
They
They
don't,
like
and they have armies, and they like them.
they do,
Yeah,
and they put laws in the books to protect themselves, and they buy appropriate, regulatory leaders to protect themselves, and there's better ways, but so in the analogy that you and I talk about a lot, which is that, that every company will eventually, unless they disrupt themselves, be disrupted by someone else, the question becomes, where will the disruption come from for the future of democracy? Is it virtual governments? Is it network state? Right. Another topic I want to hit on at Abundance this year is what biology has talked about as the network state,
yeah,
where it doesn't matter physiologically where you live. It's you're one of my peeps, I'm one of yours.
that's right.
Um, yeah.
I think so. I agree with 80% of what biology talks in the network state. A large global community like Abundance or TED or EXO has a core set of principles and values with its own cryptocurrency, can operate as a country in a very easy way and operate as a network state. But at some point, you need the physical thing. And where I disagree is when in the last bit where he says, all you have to do is get validation from an existing government and your recognition from an existing government, which is that wait a minute, that's just not going to happen in an easy way. And we have that already today. We have a lot of digital nomads that arbitrage the Puerto Rico income tax versus the Portugal income tax versus Bali, and they're moving around depending on where the regulatory regime is the friendliest. I think that's what's going to happen if unless you have an authoritarian country that doesn't let you leave. And that will actually solve a lot of the problems in that. So I do agree with much of what the network state talks about. Where I think things can be easy is a couple of areas that would be so easy to solve in federal government. One is uh, give preference to local laws rather than federal laws, and that's where states' rights actually become really interesting. Down to city rights, right? Miami is a very different place than rural Florida.
Mhm.
So even state doesn't really cut it. You have to go down to the city and local community level, so that people have their own value system that can represent, and the law should represent them. The second is every time you pass a law at the federal level, you should have an end date to that law and say that
Yes.
law. And they do this in Germany, and they do this in a few places. Very powerful.
Or
The
or
third
and
is
or take a law off the books.
or take yeah, every time you have one, you have to take 5 off the books because we're overregulated so much,
Yeah.
right? This may be the most optimistic area I'm thinking about if Elon gets in charge of a government deregulation department. It's gonna be fantastic. He's just gonna go because
I tell you, I mean, I
first
have to
principle his
I
first
listen.
principles thinking is gonna come to bear and go, "Why do you have to have a barrel of hay in the back of your London cab because it was there to feed the horse 100 years ago? Are you nuts? Just get rid of
Yeah.
that crap." Right?
This is gonna be, the most extraordinary reality TV show ever. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I think the Department of Government
And
Efficiency,
And then
um
the last point around kind of what we could do now is liquid democracy, where you're voting not based on a geography or based on ideas. Like you've got so much advanced thinking in say biotech, I'd rather give you my vote
yes,
on that topic. So you
yeah.
make category votes and say for this anything to do with this, I'll go with Lawrence Lessig on digital rights. I'll go with Peter on ethics of biotech. I'll go with Hank Greeley of Stanford on anything to do with biotech ethics, etc. And so you can just kind of use
I thought you
a
gave
proxy.
biotech ethics to me.
I
Yeah, I
double
mean,
voted. I double
that
cat
is a
voted.
beautiful thing, right? What right do I have to vote on women's reproductive rights when I'm a guy?
Leave it to the women, for God's sakes, leave it to the women.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.